Hi, Michel. Are you free to talk?
Do you know, I don't believe in free talk. But what's up?
The other day, we spoke about power. Today, I thought we should have a conversation on freedom. Power seemed such a packed, if not overwhelming concept. If the ultimate goal of biopower is to organize and manage life in entire populations, if it gets under our skin, turns us inside out, no freedom seems to be left.
I apologize for deceiving you again. I know it sounds paradoxical, but I am convinced that there is only freedom when and where there is power.
Most people have it the other way around. Where power reigns, no freedom is left.
I know, but that does not make the actual complexity into account. First of all, power is exercised only over free subjects, and only insofar they are free. This really is a conceptual requirement. The notion of power implies the idea of individual or collective subjects situated in a field of possibilities in which several kinds of conduct, several ways of reacting, and modes of behavior are available. Where the determining factors are exhaustive, there is no relationship of power.
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, consider a somewhat simple example. Take slavery. In my understanding, slavery is not a power relation because human beings are simply in chains. This is a matter of physical relationship of constraint. Power is only at stake when humans can move around and eventually even escape. In other words, there are no face-to-face confrontations of power and freedom as mutually exclusive facts. Freedom does not simply disappear when power is exercised. There is a much more complicated interplay between the two.
Isn't this a bit pedantic? I can see the conceptual point, but it tells me little to nothing about the power of freedom. Authentic freedom should be much more than a Kantian condition allowing for multiple forms of reactions and relations. Don't forget that people around the world are oppressed and fight for their rights, including more freedom.
So that brings me to my second point. In my reading, freedom is neither a natural gift nor a God-given value. I take it to be a historical phenomenon. That is, it is always relative to a certain situation. What we call freedom was referred to by Marxists and liberals, by Catholics and Nazis. Today, nationalist capitalists such as Trump and Bolsonaro cherish the values of liberty and autonomy. I don't want to say that we have to get rid of what is called freedom. Rather, we have to understand the problematic nature of this notion.
So, in fact, you're not against people fighting for their freedom or their human rights, despite the fact you were often labeled as anti-humanist.
Exactly. The only thing I am trying to highlight is that liberation is not a straightforward, self-evident thing. I've always been a little distrustful of the general theme of liberation, to the extent that if one does not treat it with a certain number of safeguards and within certain limits, there is the danger that it will refer back to the idea that there does exist a nature of a human foundation. And if you accept this idea of human nature, you run the danger of thinking that as a result of a certain number of historical, social, or economic processes, this nature is concealed, alienated, or imprisoned in and by some repressive mechanism.
That sounds very conceptual again. Your point could also be that human nature and human rights were mainly defined by philosophers such as Locke, Rousseau, and Kant, who basically were wealthy European white heterosexuals. And you could underscore that. As a consequence, women, non-Europeans, workers and others were not granted the status of full members of humanity.
Well, that's certainly true.
So, how about the yearning for freedom that we see in a lot of these marginalized and oppressed groups? What can they do right now? How can they resist the power structures in a given society? And how can I resist and gain more freedom? I have a hard time accepting that I'm always entangled in power relations.
Well, you are. But you could try a creative and active relationship to yourself and your environment. Try critical reflections on both sides and challenge all phenomena of domination at whatever level or under whatever form they present themselves: political, economic, social, sexual, institutional, and so on. Follow the Socratic imperative. Be concerned with yourself. That is, ground yourself in liberty through the mastery of self.
Come on, Michel, that sounds completely outdated. Like some advice given by a tenured white male professor of philosophy 50 years ago.
It might sound outdated, but to all of those who, in one way or the other, were confronted with the violence of European fascism and its devastating politics, it does remain a vital principle. Perhaps this is the most important lesson I learned from my academic mentor, Georges Canguilhem, who was a militant member of the Resistance.
But still.
And don't forget, it's the puppet that speaks. I told you from the start, I don't believe in free talk. I give you answers that you expect, even when you're not expecting them. The answers are more in your hands than in mine. But once you leave, I may come up with completely different kinds of words and things, and perhaps this is the way of liberating myself.
I guess I have to think about that. Thank you.
Well, feel free to get back to me whenever you like.